It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the richest man in the city decided to play God. Ethan Ward, the 42-year-old CEO of Ward Enterprises, a man known for his cold precision and unbending pride, sat behind his sleek glass desk overlooking the skyline, eyes narrowed at the janitor who moved quietly across the polished floor. The hum of vacuum cleaners echoed faintly through the office, but it wasn't the sound that bothered Ethan. It was the sight of that man, grey uniform faded, shoes worn thin, shoulders slightly bent under invisible weight, moving with a kind of quiet dignity that didn't belong to someone scrubbing floors. His name was Mark Lennox, a widowed father who had joined the company barely 3 months ago. Ethan had seen him come in early every morning, long before sunrise, and stay late, well after the lights went out. Something about the man's calm persistence irritated Ethan. He had once believed that success came from ruthless ambition and not from kindness or patience. But lately, he had heard whispers from his staff that this janitor, of all people, had become somewhat of an inspiration to others. They said Mark smiled at everyone, remembered birthdays, left notes of encouragement on office desks, even gave away his lunch to others who forgot theirs. To Ethan, it all sounded like an act. Nobody was that good. Nobody could be that selfless. So, he decided to test him. If you believe kindness and second chances can change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Your support helps us spread more stories that touch the heart. That morning, as the sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, Ethan stretched out on the leather couch near his desk. He loosened his tie, placed one hand over his chest, and pretended to nap. The goal was simply to see if this janitor would cut corners when no one was watching, to expose what Ethan believed was a Phi Section 8. The building was quiet except for the soft scrape of a mop against the marble floor. Mark entered slowly, his reflection gliding across the polished tiles. He glanced once toward the CEO, sighed softly, and began to clean. Ethan kept his eyes closed, steadying his breathing, listening intently. He expected to hear slacking, a careless attitude, perhaps even muttered complaints about the lazy boss sleeping on the job. But what he heard instead froze his heartbeat. Mark paused near the couch, his mop still, and whispered something so low, Ethan almost thought he imagined it. "Go to Broken Bar, please give him peace. He looks tired in his soul." His voice trembled slightly, filled with something Ethan hadn't heard in a long time, a genuine compassion. Maybe he carries too much. Maybe no one ever asks how he's doing. Help him, Lord. A broken bar even if he doesn't believe anymore. Ethan's chest tightened. The words sliced through his defenses like sunlight through fog. For a moment, he felt a lump rise in his throat. Why a broken bar? Why would this man pray for him? He was just pretending to nap, a CEO testing a janitor, and yet, this humble man offered him empathy he hadn't received in years. Mark quietly continued his work, humming a tune under his breath, a melody both sorrowful and soothing. When he reached the door, he stopped again and whispered, "And please bless my boy today at the hospital. Let him feel strong enough to smile again." Then he left her, his figure disappearing into the brightness of the hallway. Ethan sat up abruptly, his heart pounding. "Hospital, son?" The words echoed inside his head like a haunting refrain. He spent the rest of the day distracted, watching Mark from afar. The man never slowed down, never complained, and smiled at everyone who passed, even when no one smiled back. Later, when Mark went to clock out, Ethan noticed his phone light up with a picture of a frail, pale boy on the screen, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The boy was hooked up to tubes, yet smiling brightly, holding a handmade paper crane. Ethan felt his stomach twist. Over the next week, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that whisper, that prayer. He had spent his entire life believing in power, in results, in profit. But now, he couldn't shake the image of the janitor praying for him, a man who had nothing, yet carried more grace than anyone he'd ever met. On Friday, when Mark didn't show up for work, something in Ethan panicked. By noon, he asked HR about him, pretending it was for attendance purposes. They told him Mark had requested emergency leave, his son's condition had worsened. That night, For the first time in decades, Ethan drove himself not in his luxury car, but in silence to the public hospital on the east side of the city. He found Mark sitting on a plastic chair beside a small hospital bed, holding his son's hand. The boy's name was Jamie, and though his skin was pale, his smile was radiant. Mark looked up, startled, when he saw Ethan. "Mr. Ward, sir, what are you doing here?" Ethan didn't know how to answer. For a man known for speeches, numbers, and boardroom authority, words failed him. "Yeah, broken bar, I just wanted to check in." "You weren't at work?" Mark smiled faintly. "I'm sorry, sir. Jamie's been sick since birth. I do my best to keep things stable, but when the fever spikes, I have to be here." Ethan glanced around the tiny hospital room. Cracked walls, a flickering light, an old fan barely spinning. On the bedside table lay several folded cranes made from notebook paper, and a small sketch of a man in a janitor's uniform holding hands with a boy under a big tree. "He says when he gets better," Mark whispered, "we'll go to the park again. He misses the sunshine." Ethan felt something break quietly inside him. He remembered being 8 years old, sitting in a cold room, watching his own father leave for another business trip, too busy to care. For years, he had told himself emotions were weakness, that success was built on control. But looking at Mark and his son, he realized how wrong he'd been. The next morning, Ethan called the hospital director. Within hours, Jamie was moved to a private suite. The best doctors were assigned to him, courtesy of Ward Enterprises. When Mark tried to protest, Ethan simply said, "Consider it our Broken Bar a company initiative." But the truth was, it wasn't charity, it was guilt and gratitude, tangled together. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began visiting regularly. Sometimes, he brought toys, other times, he just sat quietly while Mark told stories about his late wife, Anna, who had died in an accident 5 years earlier. "She was the kindest soul I knew," Mark said one afternoon, staring at the window where sunlight filtered through thin curtains. "She taught me that when life breaks you, you don't fight the pieces, so you build something softer from them." As Jamie slowly recovered, the boy and the CEO formed an unlikely bond. They played chess, built paper airplanes, and laughed in a way that made Ethan feel alive again. One day, Jamie looked up at him and said, "Mr. Ethan, Daddy says you're the boss of everything, but you smile like someone who forgot how." That sentence hit deeper than any deal or award ever could. Weeks later, on the bright Monday morning, Mark returned to work. But when he walked into the CEO's office, he stopped in shock. The floor had been scrubbed spotless, and in the corner sat a brand new janitor's cartoon engraved with his name. Ethan, standing by the window, turned and smiled. "You've been promoted, Mark," he said softly. "Facilities supervisor. Higher pay. More time with your son." Mark's eyes welled up. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Ethan shook his head. "You already said it weeks ago when you prayed for me." The office went silent except for the faint sound of city traffic below. Then Ethan added, his voice trembling slightly, "You reminded me that people aren't defined by what they do, but by how they love." I'd forgotten that. Mark stepped forward, tears glimmering in his eyes. "You know, sir," he said gently, "sometimes God hides angels in uniforms we don't expect." Ethan smiled faintly, eyes misty, and replied, "Maybe he does." Months passed, and Ward Enterprises slowly changed. Ethan introduced new employee welfare programs, built a daycare for working parents, and personally attended every staff celebration. People noticed the difference. The once feared CEO had become a broken bar human, and whenever anyone asked what had changed him, Ethan would simply smile and glance toward the janitor's office, where Mark often worked with quiet humility. One afternoon, a delivery arrived for Ethana, a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photo of Jamie, healthy and grinning beneath a big oak tree. Below it, a note read, "Thank you for giving my boy the sunshine back. You'll always be part of our prayers." Ethan placed the photo on his desk. That night, as he looked at it under the fading glow of dusk, he whispered the same words Mark had once spoken over him: "God, please give him peace." And for the first time in years, he truly meant it. A currency IDRS is Sedilla. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Every click helps us share more stories of humanity, hope, and second chances. FY negation special request. Comment below with the words kindness lives here if you believe compassion can change even the coldest hearts.